Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us a very special guest from Israel, Dr. Yoram Hazony. Dr. Hazony is an acclaimed philosopher, Bible scholar, and political theorist. Dr. Hazony did his BA from Princeton University in East Asian Studies and received his PhD from Rutgers University in political philosophy. In 1994, Dr. Hazony founded the Shalem Center in Jerusalem, where he served as president and then provost. He also served as director of John Templeton's Foundation's project on Jewish philosophical theology. He also additionally served as member in the Committee of Israel's Higher Education. Dr. Hazony has also authored many acclaimed books, the most recent being in 2022, Conservatism, a Rediscovery. Other such notable books are The Virtue of Nationalism. Come join us today as we discuss the different aspects of nationalism, what it means to society today, and what is to become of it tomorrow. Dr. Hazony, welcome to Insight. I know this has been a very hectic trip for you. You've come all the way from Israel, but we're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Well, as you are such a renowned expert on at least nationalisms, nations, ideas like this, I'm going to start with a really basic question. What is a nation, and what is the difference between a nation and a state?
Look, this is a big argument in the West. In liberal thinking, nation and state are confused all of the time. Nation is something that's natural to human societies. Everywhere that we look, in all of human history, in all places in the globe, we find that human beings tend to stick to one another. They form into groups. Families, and then groups of families, which can be called clans, groups of clans, which we call tribes, groups of tribes, which are nations, groups of nations, families of nations. Now, these things, they're not eternal, they're not immutable, they're not fixed. They're always changing because everything in human societies rises and falls. But a nation is a group of tribes that recognizes a certain common inheritance, which can be it can be language, religion, law, culture, ancestry or a belief in ancestry. That's on the one hand a certain recognition of commonality, and on the other hand, a common history of coming together in great efforts, experiencing triumphs in wartime or in other great works, and also common disasters that are remembered together collectively and handed down. So that's a nation. Now you'll notice that my description of a nation as a group of tribes with a common inheritance and a shared history, that description does not include the word state. There are many nations that have no states or have states only sometimes. My people, the Jewish people, if you read in the Bible, there are two kingdoms that together last for about 1,000 years. But the Jewish people often, both before these kingdoms and afterwards, is without a state. The division of the Jewish kingdom into two is regarded in the Bible as a great tragedy. But the idea of having a single state, which is kind of a biblical Jewish ideal of trying to unite all of the tribes under a single unified rule so that they don't have war with one another, there's no such necessity. Poland only became a state again very recently. The same is true for Hungary. If you think of the Greek city-states, the Greek city-states were aware that they were a nation, an ethnos, but they never became a single nation until modern times. They were a single nation, but they never unified under a single state. So when we speak of the state, we're talking about a central government with a bureaucracy, a single ruler, the enforcement of law, an army. That doesn't necessarily come to every nation in every period.
So what would be your examples for both, if we were to talk about a state What is India?
Well, look, you can be a state, an imperial state, like the Roman Empire or the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Persian Empire. There's a single people which conquers and rules over dozens of other nations, maybe hundreds of nations even. In Jewish tradition, in the biblical tradition, there's a distinction between an imperial state whose goal is to conquer as much as possible. The claim is that if we conquer, then we'll bring peace, we'll bring prosperity to the world. And what we today call a national state, which is the ideal of a state that stays within its borders. In the Bible, Moses, the lawgiver of the Jewish people, he commands us to have borders. And the Jewish people are not allowed to conquer the neighbors. And from there we get the principle that it's immoral to try to impose your way on the rest of the world. That doesn't mean that as Jews that we don't believe that we have something to teach. In fact, every nation has the possibility of contributing to the other nations. But there's a big distinction between nationalism, which is a political theory that says, look, the world is governed best when nations have borders and each is concerned with its own interests, its own values, its own tradition, and its own path to God. And imperialism, which is a universal theory that says, look, we can come up with one state that is best for the entire world.
Correct. So now we talk about nationalisms. Could you explain to us what is nationalism and why do people now often see it in a very stigmatized way?
Nationalism in its traditional definition, nationalism is a political theory that sees the world as governed best when it's governed by independent nations. Now, obviously, you don't want to turn this into a utopia. There's no way to make a world like that perfect. This is not an attempt to perfect the world. But it's a political theory that says we're better off recognizing the distinctions among nations and as much as possible allowing them to govern themselves. Why is it that this has become so controversial? During the 19th century, all of the people that like to see themselves as liberal and advanced and progressive, they were all nationalists. They were all in favor of independence for India, independence for the Jewish people in Israel, independence for Ethiopia, and so forth. But after the Second World War, for a number of different reasons, both liberal intellectuals and Marxist intellectuals, two kinds of Western universalist theories, liberals and Marxists, both of them began to say that nationalism is an evil. Now, the immediate reason for that was because Hitler called himself, the Nazis called themselves nationalists. Now, by our traditional definitions, the Nazis were not nationalists because Hitler has no interest in a world of independent nations. If you read Mein Kampf, not that I recommend it, but if you pick it up, you'll see that Hitler uses the word nationalist to mean that the German people should conquer the world. He says, we'll be the lords of the earth, the mistress of the globe. That's Hitler's description of nationalism. And when he turns to talk about the French or English idea of independent nations, he says that's just weakness, that's effeminate, that's contemptible. A real nationalism will take over the whole world. But I prefer not to learn my political theory from Adolf Hitler. And since we have already 3,000 years of tradition within Judaism and among other nations that sees this kind of aspiration as evil. It's true that we Jews believe there is one God, creator of heaven and earth, but that doesn't mean that there has to be one empire on earth. Correct.
So this would be Hitler's idea of nationalism would then be imperialistic?
He doesn't use the word imperialism for whatever his reasons are.
Correct.
But when we look at it, we immediately recognize a descendant of Roman imperialism. The Roman Empire in the Middle Ages becomes the Holy Roman Empire, which is a weak Christian imitation, but with an aspiration to try to make Christianity into a world government. And the Holy Roman Empire that's a German theory. Sometimes it's called the Holy Roman Empire of the Germanies. And that German theory, it's the excuse for Germans to say, our Reich is going to rule all of Europe and beyond Europe. When Hitler says we're the Third Reich, he directly is appealing to the tradition of the Holy Roman Empire, to the idea that there are no borders, there are no boundaries. The fate of the Germans is to be lord of the earth.
Correct. From World War II, has this changed, or has there been any evolution of the idea of nationalism?
It's a little bit complicated. I'm going to make it too simplistic, but I think it's helpful to see it as something simple. After the Second World War, America and Britain and the other European and English-speaking democracies gave up on their particularist nationalist religious traditions. America used to be a Christian nation. Christian nation is not my expression, it's the expression of the American Supreme Court. And America recognized itself as a Christian nation or Christian people with a particular religious and philosophical inheritance up until the Second World War. After the Second World War, there's a rapid shift to what we today call liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is a secularized, Enlightenment rationalist version of the old Christian democracy, but it's much more aggressively universalistic, because Enlightenment rationalism believes there's only one rational way for human beings to think, and that it has the answers to all of the political questions. Enlightenment liberalism becomes, instead of Christianity, in effect, the religion of America. And that lasts for about 60 years, let's say from the early 1960s until the year 2020, when we see a new dramatic shift, almost, I would say a cultural revolution in America and parts of Europe, where the old liberal democracy is overtaken by a new, your viewers may know the word woke. Woke is a form of neo-Marxism, and it's even more aggressive and revolutionary than the old liberalism. And that's the great new challenge. I mean, I'm not a liberal, I'm a conservative, so I see liberalism as a revolutionary movement that challenges all traditional societies. But there's no doubt that woke neo-Marxism is far more aggressive, far more crazy in all sorts of ways. And as the liberal institutions of America and Europe are overtaken now by this new strand of neo-Marxism, that becomes an immediate threat to all conservative societies and even to liberal societies.
So do you think, and I'm glad you brought up, this woke sort of narrative that we hear a lot right now, and we'll come back to that. But do you think that is the reason that nationalism is perceived negatively, not just in the West, but also now in countries like India?
Opposing nationalism is it's really almost a necessary conclusion of liberalism. If you begin with, you take the starting assumptions of Hobbes or Locke or Rousseau's On the Social Contract or Kant, if you begin with these Enlightenment liberal thinkers, you'll see that they build their view of the political world as a kind of mathematics, as a kind of geometric proof. They begin with certain axioms, and there's very few of them, and they're very clear and they're well known. Number one, that all human beings are perfectly free and perfectly equal by nature. Number two, there are no moral or political obligations unless you accept them yourself consciously and by consent. And number three, that there's this universal reason, that all you need to do is think reasonably and you'll come up with these axioms and these answers. Now, there's a kernel of truth in each of these statements. The problem is that when you turn it into a mathematical system, you ignore all the other aspects of what a human being is, including, for example, we discussed about the nature of human beings to form groups, to form nations, to form collectives, to care about their inheritance, to be concerned about cohesion within the society and handing down traditions. All of these things are left out of the liberal axiom system. It has no resources to explain any of these things, and if you focus on it, you become blind to all other aspects of human nature other than what exists in the axioms. So for many years, people were, they mixed liberalism and conservatism and traditionalism. After World War II, they went for a pure 100% high-octane liberalism, liberalism alone, only liberalism. And this view, if you ask, how does this high-octane liberalism, how does it explain the existence of borders? Well, it can't explain the existence of borders. If someone walks up to your border, whether it's America or Europe or India or Israel, right? Someone walks up to your border and says, hello, I'm perfectly free and I'm perfectly equal and I choose my fate.
To
and
live
I
here.
choose, yes, I choose to live here. I choose to cross the border. And you say, well, no, here's our army. We're going to come and stop you. So from the perspective of a thoroughgoing liberal perspective, that's fascism. That's authoritarianism. That's crazy. How dare you say that he or she has no right to cross your border and to live there because he's perfectly free and perfectly equal. All right, so both the old liberalism and the woke neo-Marxism, both of them are universal theories. Both of them claim to be able to answer what is the right answer for every country in the world at every time and place. Compare this to what we call conservatism. Conservatism is a word that we use to describe a political outlook that begins with an existing society, existing families, tribes, nations, an existing inheritance. And it's a philosophy of what do I need to do in order to maintain and increase the strength and well-being of my nation, my tradition. Well, in part this means that conservatism will be different in every nation.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Because if it recognizes that human beings form groups and each group has its own inheritance, even every family is different from every other family. So if you're a conservative and you begin from recognizing that reality, well, then you have to be very skeptical when someone comes and says, look, but I have an answer for all the nations.
Correct.
Okay, so conservatism will be somewhat different in every country. Yet, at the same time, I have to say, I come to Israel, to India for the first time from Israel. I'm a Jew, and some things are foreign and strange. And many things are familiar. Many aspects of Indian society, they remind me of Jewish society because I recognize that common effort to preserve traditions, to give honor to the past, to give honor and respect to different people who have accomplished different things in society, which is in liberalism and Marxism, honor disappears. It's not part of human nature as they understand it. So there are things that I think are universal to conservatives, but a skepticism of anybody who comes and says, I have the answers for everyone, that's foundational.
Well, it's important to look at even, what is common in a nuanced way. It's not 100% common. There are convergences and divergences. But I'm glad that you noticed this about India in terms of the importance of tradition and honor and, the similarities that the Jewish culture has and the Indian culture has. But we've also seen with this woke culture a growing level of focus on extreme individual rights, also on the fact that now there are other groups that segregate society. So whether that could be LGBTQ, whether it could be, maybe earlier on it was religion, that could have kept one society with certain different segments in it. But now it seems to be a whole different set of values.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Well, look, it might be that not everyone in India is ready to hear this, but the emphasis on the rights of the individual as the final, the ultimate value, the answer to all questions, that comes straight from liberalism. And the Marxists actually resist it somewhat because Marxists, all the different kinds of Marxists, what they have in common is they all understand society as a struggle by each group to oppress and exploit all of the other groups. So Marxists look at society, they see, the first thing they ask is, who's the dominant group? And the next question they ask is, who are they oppressing and exploiting, and how are they doing it? Now, again, there is a kernel of truth. Of course, there are dominant groups, and sometimes they're exploitative and oppressive to the point of evil. But the difference between a Marxist and a conservative view is a conservative would say every society in every generation needs to be, you need to ask who are the strongest groups, and you need to ask what can we repair, what small changes can we make to improve things in this generation while making sure that we're not going too far and destroying everything. Yeah. Whereas the Marxists say, look, as a matter of principle, the dominance of a certain group is itself evil. The exploitation and the oppression is inevitable. The conservatives are lying to you when they say you could renegotiate. The truth is, revolution is the only answer. The dominant class has to be destroyed. So here what we see with this woke invasion is a merging of two things. On the one hand, the theory of revolution, that whoever is the dominant class is always exploitative. They're always oppressing, whether they know it or not, whether they agree or not. It doesn't matter. It's always true. That merges with the liberal belief that rights are the only answer, and the woke neo-Marxists, they use the language of rights in order to advance their revolution. What do? They look and they ask, who's the exploiting group? They look for the other groups. They tell them, look, do you know that your rights are being violated? And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not.
Sometimes they might just be dominant and not exploitative.
Well, but they don't allow for that to exist. See, from our perspective, in India, you might say, or I'll say it for you if you don't want to say it. You might say, look, India has traditions that are in many ways very, very good. And the dominant Hindu inheritance is what gives this society the ability to be a democracy, to extend tolerance to different kinds of groups, such as my own. What happens if another group destroys the Hindu dominance and it inherits the land? This is a question that in Israel we have to ask all the time. We're happy to have Christian and Muslim and Druze citizens of our country, as long as they serve in the army, as long as they contribute and participate, then we're happy and we can treat them as brothers. But what happens if they ingest this kind of Marxist view, and then you end up with a combination, some kind of Marxist Islam, where the goal is to overthrow the dominant Jewish population? Will Israel be a democracy after this revolution, or America? Will America be a democracy after the Marxists are done? I don't believe it will be. So, if so, then we have to move in the direction that you were suggesting, that there's to have a stable society means to have a dominant group.
Correct.
Which doesn't mean they're always right. Sometimes they're evil. But for a stable society, for any kind of justice, for any kind of continuity and permanence, there has to be a dominant group.
So when you've traveled so much, and you've obviously, studied this in great depth, and you've observed, like you've observed in India as well. How do you see the next generation, the younger people, reacting to this? Do they understand where wokeism might lead them, or what it might do to nations, or the repercussions of that? Or is it going to become the alternative to what we have today?
Look, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you for sure what the future is, but I'll tell you what I'm seeing in the present. What I'm seeing is, on the one hand, the combination of 60 years of liberalism, which gave birth to the woke revolution, and now we have the woke. This is uprooted and destroyed Christian tradition, Jewish tradition, every national tradition where the society has embraced liberalism as an ideology instead of the traditional ideology. 2-3 generations later, the young people, they have no respect for the tradition, no affection. They have contempt. They have contempt for their elders. They don't feel liberated by their parents and grandparents. They have disgust and contempt for their grandparents and their parents. And in that kind of society, everything, by the way, Marx writes about this powerfully when he says everything that's solid melts into air under liberalism. Yes. This famous quote. Yes. So this is true. You can look and you can see it. Now, I don't want to make it sound hopeless. We are seeing a reaction. I'm involved among the organizers in North America and Europe. In almost every country, we have now groups of national conservatives whose purpose is to reclaim the independence of the nation and the concern for the particular interests and traditions and inheritance of the nation. That means that it's a worldview that favors religion. It's a worldview that looks to restore things that have been lost. I can't tell you I'm optimistic. I think that it's very far gone, and I'm afraid for countries like India and Israel, where I don't think the leadership, intellectual or political, understands the depth of the destruction that has been caused in liberal countries, in Western countries. Maybe it can be turned around, but and we're doing everything we can, but I can't promise.
Well, we've seen a change in social structures, family structures. We've seen divorce rates go up. We've seen, people not getting married, having less kids, or no kids at all. What sort of impact do you think this would have on societies? And what is the damage that you've already seen?
Look, there's a vast literature at this point. I'm not a big fan of the social sciences, but in some areas, there's a tremendous literature. Hundreds of scholars have written at this point about answering the question: what happens when individualism, when liberalism, the concern for the individual self above everything else, when that begins to take the family apart. So as you say, you immediately see a decline in marriage rates, a rise in divorce, rise in children outside of being born outside of families. People aren't aware of this, that in America, 40% of children do not have two married parents. In Europe, it's over 50%.
That's huge statistics.
It's inconceivable. I mean, it's simply unbelievable. It's moving so fast that we can't even believe that it's happening. Now, in those families where, in a very large number of them, the mother is left trying to raise the children alone, which means that the family enters into poverty. Most mothers can't both earn everything that they need in order to support the family financially and be in charge of discipline and education and raise the children. And so, of course, there is the attempt to remarry, and these remarriages are relatively weak in comparison to first marriages. And the children, I'm not saying this happens, God forbid, every time, but the incidence of abuse and neglect by these the new fathers that come in. It's astronomical. A child, the social scientists claim that a child is more than 100 times as likely to be abused or killed by the mother's new husband as from a natural husband, by the natural father of the children. So even if there's no abuse, right? Even if there's no violence, which is probably the majority of the cases, still an adoptive father and mother never have the same kind of feelings towards the children, the same kind of commitment. Well, I don't want to say never. For sure there are some cases. We're talking about statistics. You will never have a society where the biological parents, the natural parents, are no longer willing to be together. They're no longer raising the children are growing up without the two natural parents. You'll never have such a society where the children grow up healthy and strong in the way that they could in a traditional society. And this is something the great sociologist Durkheim famously wrote in his book about suicide, wrote about what he called anomie. Anomie is a condition of lawlessness. It's the condition when the traditions have been overthrown and the young people growing up in the society, they don't have direction. They don't know which way to go. So liberals will say, oh, that's wonderful. It's good that they don't have direction because then they're free to choose. So there's some truth to that. But the flip side of being free to choose in everything is that you can't rely on inherited answers for anything. And then it turns out that actually most young people cannot be healthy and happy when they have no inherited answers for anything. Instead of being kind of like a Nietzsche and a Superman, I invent my own values out of myself. Instead of that,
correct. That's what he says, right? As you go on, you'll create some new values.
Well, he hopes. He hopes. Look, he thinks. I want to be fair to him. He's an atheist, but he's a brilliant atheist, and he's smart, and he doesn't think that most people can create these new values. He thinks there's a rare few that can create these new values, and he hopes that they will. But in the meantime, that hasn't happened. In the meantime, we see deterioration, decay. By the time we get to the third generation, most of the young people are saying, it's all hopeless. Why am I alive? What's the point?
So does he think that it's only, how do you pronounce it, the Übermensch? Is it only the Superman who can create the values and not anybody else?
Yes. You see, because Nietzsche has been adopted by the universities, they turn everything unpleasant and conservative and rightist into something leftist and pleasant. So there's the version of Nietzsche they teach in the universities, where everyone can create values. Everyone can be free.
Which is not true.
Which is not true.
And then what are the kind of values that you create, That becomes a question. Are they positive values? Are they values?
For sure. So, I mean, in the 20th century, Nietzsche didn't live to see this, but we did. We got to see the kinds of worldview that come out in the West after Christianity is eliminated. And we have Nazism, we have fascism, we have all the different varieties of Marxism, all of them vicious, all of them both on the right and the left, both of them full of crazy revolutionary visions, all of them unwilling to actually learn from the past in any significant way. And look, I understand that from the perspective of Hindu tradition and Hindu society, there are probably many people, and I've heard it a little bit already, saying, well, look, that's a product of the West. That's a consequence of the West. And that is true. But to the extent that liberalism and Marxism are brought into society like India, to the extent that they're accepted, they will begin to do the same thing. And the consequences will be, young people will say, what do we need these foolish traditions for? And they'll start to look for and accept these crazy revolutionary theories. Maybe they won't be Western theories. Maybe they'll be new, right? Indigenous new crazy theories in India, but they won't be good ones.
Correct. Because obviously nowadays everything that has any resonance to the past seems people have a need to challenge it, and but let me, we are running out of time, and I could discuss a lot more with you, and I know you have a flight to catch. So let me come to one of my last questions. Religion plays a huge role, especially in countries like India and countries like Israel. What sort of role do you think that religion plays today in terms of in politics, or in an ideal world? What sort of positions should religion have in opposition to, like, let's say, secularism?
If every society has a dominant framework. Okay, every social group, every family, every nation has a dominant basic framework of how it approaches the world. Now, often people are not conscious of it. Sometimes you need to come from outside and look carefully to understand what is it and how is it different from other families and other nations. But it's part of human nature that parents seek to present and, to a certain extent, to enforce a basic worldview on their children and their grandchildren, and nations do the same, and civilizations do it, families of nations. I think that part of the liberal, secular, Western myth, the rationalist myth, is we can get rid of all the religions, all the traditional religions, and then we'll simply have something that's pure reason or science, or something that everyone can agree on, and it will only be the truth. And now, if you look at America and Europe, and you see the greatest scientific publications and institutions, the research institutions and the universities, all falling after 2 generations to this crazy Marxist ideology. And any of us can look. They tell us first. They tell us that there's no real difference between men and women, and then they tell us that scientifically there's no problem for an adolescent to change from a woman to a man and then back again, and then to use science and medicine to do this through surgery, and there'll be no damage, there'll be no consequences.
But what about children's sort of protection of children, or the fact that they aren't of adult age to make their own decisions? There's somebody else making decisions on.
But here you see it, that the talk of rights. I mean, this is I think probably the crucial point. You can speak usefully about rights when you're speaking within a certain tradition in which, what are rights? Rights are a balance between different interests, a balance between different concerns. So, for example, about children, parents should be able to make all the decisions for the children, but if a parent is abusing the child, if he's breaking the child's arms, if the child is being sexually molested or in some other way, then the neighbors, the relatives, the state, people have an obligation to come in and say to the parents, no, beyond this point, you can't go. So what I've just described is a traditional balance. It sounds like reasoning, but it's a traditional balance that we inherit. Once you eliminate the traditions, all the balance, all the common sense is an inherited tradition. Once you have contempt for the traditions, the common sense goes. And then anybody can claim any right. So today we literally have, in America and places in Europe, we literally have organizations that are saying the freedom of the child to decide at the age of 13 or 14 to undergo surgery it defeats any rights that the parents have. And the schools are given the right to lie to the parents and hide from the parents what's happening to the children. This is craziness. And I've heard some people here in India say, look, that's a Western problem. We in India, we have a more moderate tradition about transgenderism. Look, it's fine. I have no problem with different traditions, but you have to understand that this woke agenda, its goal is to destroy the traditions. And so, if India is more moderate about transgenderism, they'll find another way to undermine the parents, to undermine the traditions, and to undermine the nation. That is the goal.
I have to say that I feel very lucky that my parents didn't let me make every decision that I wanted to when I was a kid. Right. But having said that, things don't sound very bright for the conservative thought in the future, but where do you see it heading in the future? Okay. This is my final question.
Please don't despair. No despair.
Okay, we take the despair away.
No. Let me just say, in closing, a little word from Jewish scripture. We have in the Jewish Bible, we have a general framework that says, look, ultimately what a society does determines whether it's going to live or die. God, creator of heaven and earth, will make sure that if you continue to be evil at length, in the end your society will be destroyed. And the opposite is also true, that we believe that a righteous society that repairs itself and and repents of its evil, eliminates its evil, that it's possible for God to bless it and for it to continue and to grow ever stronger. Now, we have maybe in India you've heard of Sodom, because that's the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah, that their evil is so great that God comes and destroys them. But we also have in our Bible the city of Nineveh in Syria, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and the prophet Jonah. The reason he runs away from God is because he is afraid that God will have mercy on Nineveh. He says, they're so evil, don't have mercy on them. And God says, leave this up to me. And then we see the Assyrian king repents. He hears the prophet saying, you're going to be destroyed. He puts on sackcloth and ashes. He calls on all of his nobles and all of his people to repent. And that's what happens. And God forgives them, and the prophet is not happy with this, but that option is there. So when I say I don't have a crystal ball, I really speak from Jewish tradition, that until we actually see the destruction happening, there's always a possibility of repenting, of seeking God, of seeking your traditions, of working to restore them. And we don't give up. Our job is to work to repentance and restoration. And what's going to happen, we don't know.
Well, on that positive note, Dr. Hazony, I hope to have you on again. And thank you very much for giving us your time.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Dr. Hazony, one of the foremost experts in the world on ideas of nationalism and conservatism. Dr. Hazony's discussion with me has left us to ponder about some fundamental questions, like the question of individual rights and the future of conservatism. If you are interested, do read some of his highly acclaimed books on these subjects. But until next time, thank you for watching.